Welcome back to the Rewild Yourself Champions Conversations. Rewild Yourself is a global initiative by the Voice for Nature Foundation that focuses on creating opportunities for individuals and communities to connect with nature and wild places, uniting both humanity and nature's well-being. Our champions form a selected group of inspiring people from all over the world doing great things for nature. Hit subscribe to learn, be inspired, and hear what stories they have to tell. Today we're diving into Nadia's world. Nadia is a land justice campaigner and co-director of the Right to Roam campaign. She also nurtures and leads the Raven Network, a dedicated space for radical anti-racist voice working within the nature and conservation space. She's also a naturalist and ornithologist that has spent most of her career championing biodiversity and environmental protections. What living thing do you feel a close affinity with?
The animal that I think best represents me, or I feel affiliated with, the animal itself might disagree, um, is the blackbird, which is a very common, widespread, ubiquitous songbird found across Europe. I've just always honed in. I think you just hone in on things sometimes. For people, it might be a kind of tree or whatever. But this is a bird that I just notice every single day, and it seems to provide me with like a sense of comfort, a sense of belonging. It's that whole thing around where nature allows you to understand your own feelings through the prism of something else. So if a blackbird is singing quite mournfully, it helps me think about what I'm thinking about, or the way that they kind of run across the grass. I think that there's like a playfulness and a cheekiness that I align with. So I think it's just how I see all nature, which is a way of helping you understand and describe the world via something else, because humans are complex and it's really hard to just think about being a human. But blackbirds for me do that the best.
What first sparked your interest in nature?
It's kind of always been there, so I don't know when that spark of a moment was. I remember little vignettes from my childhood, little moments of fascination and awe. I guess they're just kind of like memory anchors or moments that were like validating for me now to be somebody that's enthusiastic about nature and wildlife. I guess there's these little moments that validate that curiosity as a child, whether it was saving frogs from a lawnmower. Someone was mowing the lawn and I was frantically picking up tiny froglets, and I must have only been in primary school. And seeing jellyfish on beaches for the first time, these moments of just like awe and fascination. And actually, I don't know whether there was a spark, but it was certainly the thing that just drew me. Other things didn't draw my attention so much, I don't think. It would be shapes and smells, things that I could touch and explore. And that never really stopped. Like the fascination of just like this whole world of stuff around the human built environment that nobody told you about. Like nobody tells you about it. So my family certainly didn't. And so, you'd find like a willow leaf with a little lump on it, and then inside there would be a little grub. And then I'd be like, what is this thing? And that would just be because there happened to be a tree and I noticed the leaf. But no adults, no one in the built environment, no one at school taught you this. It was just kind of like this unspoken, huge, vibrant thing around us. It was just far more comforting and reliable and understand, than the human stuff that we were given. I grew up in the 90s, born in the 80s, grew up in the 90s, and this was a time of like big anti-whaling campaigns by Greenpeace. And it was a big time of lots of big WWF type campaigns, which somehow entered my sphere. I'm not sure how that might have been. But I was aware of this thing called Greenpeace, and I was just like, which was my first understanding from a very young age of this world is in trouble, and none of the adults around me cared. So I was just like, also, our wildlife is dying. People, animals are being hunted. We're worried about the Amazon's being cut down. I was aware of that from a young age. But like my parents didn't talk about it, okay? The adults around me didn't talk about it, okay? And then there's this really big sense of like fear and injustice of just like, I think like the dissociation between my feelings about the natural world and what matters to what you're taught in school and what your parents talk about. Like it felt dissociative. And I think, like, as you were saying, children are really, really naturally empathic and intuitive to the natural world around them. And we have to work really hard to tell kids that, like, what clothes you wear matters, like how much money you earn matters, like social normities and nicety matter above the natural instinct, which is, I think, to be curious about the natural world, to be in the natural world, to care for that and nurture it. We have to, like, do quite a lot of work. I didn't seem to be able to stop caring. And yeah, definitely a combination of, a very, very strong natural pull to the natural world, and I think what was going on around me, somehow that bleeding in and seeping into my awareness.
Tell us about your personal journey with nature conservation and the issues you found along the way.
There was a moment when I worked in nature conservation and I was really struggling with the weight of the work that needed doing, the size of the struggle, and yeah, I didn't understand how I could make an impact or make a difference. So whilst I had a full-time career in nature conservation, there's a big part of me that kept going, I'm not doing enough, I'm not doing enough, I'm not doing enough. And everyone around me kept saying, you are doing enough. It's just the world is hard. And I was just like, I hear what you're saying, and logically I get that, but that's not what I'm feeling. And I'd spent a good year trying to needle into understanding this sense of not doing enough. What's my purpose? And then the more I looked into it, I was just like, it feels quite egocentric and arrogant to be like, what's my purpose? Like, very individualistic, as though I matter that much that my purpose must be fulfilled. I, and then actually it led me down this kind of understanding of being a savior. And I think I came across this understanding of this like white savior complex of like big white middle class led charities who just wanted to. Why is it there are hundreds of wildlife charities in the UK, and we have some of the worst wildlife biodiversity left in the world? Like, we have hundreds of wildlife organizations, but our wildlife is depleted. And I think I just started to understand this, just like, we don't see ourselves as part of nature. The people that I'm working along are very white middle class who live a really high consumption lifestyle, who are trying to save nature as opposed to recognizing they're part of it. And we are all nature. And that includes all people. And so why, as an organization, do we not care about the welfare of humans alongside the welfare of nature? And I came across this poem that you referenced, which really set clear for me this understanding of like, when you're trying to save something, we're not approaching this in a really whole, like, we're not recognizing that in order for nature to be safe from capitalist systems destruction, it needs to be about the whole of humanity and the healing of ourselves along with the rest of the world. You can't save nature from patriarchy, white supremacy, capitalism. But you have to actually think about, how do we do this work in a way that rejects those systems? And in order to do that, we all equally matter. And to be in service to the natural world is to also be in service to ourselves as a species, and to care that we matter too, and our relationship with land and nature all matters. But if we're going to put ourselves up here and save the poor little things down here, we're using the same ideologies that suppressed nature to the point where it's a resource.
How do you approach conservation?
Actually, we're all equal, and there's reciprocal. We all need to be in service to each other. So we need to make sure we look after our watercourses so that our watercourses can look after us, and all of the species that fit into those places. And it helped me understand that my job is not to be a savior and not be the best at what I do and to change the world, but it's how I can practice being in service, in the gentlest and kindest way possible, and to do the little bit that I can, but coming from what I believe is a more useful, not useful, I want to use the word useful, but to be in a place of service. And when you're in service, you're just on a level with everything, and not trying to control it, which we can't control nature.
What is lacking in the conservation space?
No one would grieve as a community. And even to the point where I remember I had to lead a meeting at our head office, and I was going to facilitate a session. I was facilitating the introduction meet and greet. First of all, I suggested everyone that we go outside and sit on the grass and be grounded. And people were like uncomfortable. And I was just like, we're here to save nature. These are the best ecological minds in the UK in this room, and nobody wants to sit on the grass. And then the other one was, I suggested that people get in pairs and ask some quite exploratory questions around why they're here, what brought them here. And there was a bit of like a pushback of like, it's a bit too like emotional. And I think when you don't deal with, so for example, if you have a relative that dies, and instead of allowing yourself to feel, which is what people do, they're like, right, we need to organize a funeral, we need to do this, we should sort out the stuff. And actually people go into fixing mode because it's something to do. But a really important part of grieving is to feel. And when you feel how that person was in your life, what changes they made, and you try and remember them and remember the joy that they brought, it really eases, it's good for the grieving. Grieving is a really, really important acknowledging and naming the fact that this person has gone now, my life will change now, and I will miss them. And when you don't acknowledge those feelings, you lock them down. It's really quite traumatizing to the body. Feeling is a vital part of what it is to be human, and grief work comes in lots of different forms. And this isn't my area of expertise. This has been well researched by people who know a lot more about this than me. But I guess grief is about loss of life, but loss of opportunities that you should have had. Grief is loss of the natural world, and we're not grieving it or naming it appropriately. The language we use for nature, we use the word climate change. It's quite dissociative scientific language. We're not willing to say, the heart behind it is that our whole Earth community is dying. My dream for within the nature conservation sector is to recognize that we are a community of humans bound together to be in service and to allow ourselves to feel. Now, the sector is dominated by a lot of white men, particularly in the higher up managerial positions. And men in their 40s, 50s, 60s aren't going to cry in front of you or emote. And so they're gatekeeping the sector. I think it's holding it in quite a non-emotional space, I think. And it's not saying all men, obviously, but, it's quite a patriarchal white supremacy. The ideologies that sit behind white supremacy, which is just like yes or no thinking, things are right or they're wrong. White supremacy thinking is very kind of like, action oriented, science oriented, like go in, be efficient, get things done. We don't have time for our emotions. And I don't think we come up with the best solutions. And I don't think the only kind of emotion that I get a sense of is this one of urgency, which is quite panicked. But it's not making us sort things out any quicker, is it?
How can we get others to care for nature?
I would guess I would invite people to reflect on happy memories, childhood happy memories. More often than not, it's nature based or outdoors based. Quite often, can be kind of family based, I guess, as well. But I think I would want to ask the question about. I actually bumped into a not very nice man on a ferry the other day, and he was denying climate change and all of this stuff. And I just said to him, I was like, can I just ask you why you think I'm saying to you that this matters? And what is my motivation? Help me understand what my motivation is to tell you that this thing matters and is all our work to do. And he kind of then acquiesced and started going, well, yeah, it probably is a problem. The thing you've got to do with people is to find common ground. And that it would take a lot of sort of conversation and gentle inquiry to understand where people are at, and to be able to have that reflection, which requires vulnerability, right? It's hard because people need to be vulnerable in order to genuinely share their feelings. That can take a little bit of time and a little bit of trust building, particularly if the things that you're saying and representing are things that they actively think they don't believe in, or care about. But I think our intuition is super strong as humans. We know when we're doing something wrong, and we know when something doesn't feel right, but we have a very good way of blocking that out. I know people kind of, relationships is a good one, right? People have been in relationships where they know they weren't right, but they kind of stay in them for longer than they should. Deep down, you just know, from the moment it starts that they're probably never going to be together. But we just ignore it, or we know when we bump into someone, that person doesn't, that I feel a bit of conflict there with that person. Our intuition was we just kick about in life. The things that we purchase in the supermarket, I think deep down we know this smells really chemically, or like this probably isn't right. We probably shouldn't be doing this. I probably shouldn't be putting bleach down the plug hole. I think the intuition and all people going down that road of conversation, I think will acknowledge that something's not right. And that might be the fact that it doesn't seem right that most people can't afford to buy a house anymore. And it doesn't seem right that rent is, £1,400 in London. Like, I think, or that we're putting, sewage from our toilets directly into the rivers. Like, I feel like it won't take a long time to get to that conversation where you're just like, what doesn't feel right about what you're reading about today? Really listen to your intuition.
Why is conservation a communal concern?
Is to remember it's not your individual problem, actually. An individual person living a super eco life in isolation isn't making a difference. But people working together, talking about helping each other through their grief, talking about it, noticing wildlife, when it's done externally, it can just be little steps and small changes, and actually practicing that it's not about ego based. It's not about me being the best eco person. It's not ego based work. It's community based work. It's all people.
Tell us about why you joined the Right to Roam campaign.
The more that I recognize that actually the majority of our issues with wildlife decline were down to the actions of a very individual few. It's not politicians or government. It's the people that own the land and work on the land. And I was like, I think we need to like have a conversation to these people and call that out. So basically I actually just got in touch with Guy Shrubsole to say, to talk to him about how nature conservation, the loss of our wildlife, is directly linked to right to roam.
Tell us about the right to roam.
When the enclosures happened as land was enclosed in England, it was no longer within community ownership and care. So where we used to, a third of England used to be common land. So all communities in and around land who lived in the countryside, as it was, would work off the land. They would take food from it. They would graze their animals. It was a common place that you could live a subsistence lifestyle off the land. But because it was in commons and belonged to everybody, there is this natural way of understanding the care of it, because you don't want to be the person that's destroying it. There is this like way of understanding, it's not mine, it's not yours, it's ours. It's all of ours, and it kind of can't be owned because it's common land, which is an understanding that, all, I would say, Indigenous communities have this same understanding. Land cannot be owned. We are of it, and it is, wildness. And it's still cultivated and it's still managed, but it cannot be owned. And it was the move towards property ownership and exclusion that meant that landowners, if you owned it, you have the right then to destroy it, to take resource from it. Nature is a resource. White supremacy again. White man is supreme. Nature is less than. It's there to take from. And so my understanding was that actually, I don't think we can fix the problems in this country at all without a fundamental cultural shift in how we see landowners and their right to destroy. And the first step is to at least have the right to walk on it. And so that 60 million people in England have the right to at least go and see the destruction that they're doing. And when that starts getting exposed, we'll start understanding our rights should and ought to be more. And a right to roam is just a good, achievable first step.
What would you say to those arguing for land and property ownership rights over the right to roam?
I would say to the people that support property ownership and exclusion, first of all, 5% of England is made up by gardens. And I think we can have a system that people don't go into your gardens. Okay. And then we've got the other 95%. In order to sustain the deeply unequal system that we've currently got, it requires an amount of brainwashing for the public to be in support of this kind of ownership. And in order to believe that myth, you kind of then have to support it when other people do have money. Just, it's this idea that if you think it's wrong and someone pays £30 million for an estate, it's like this idea that if you didn't support that, then they would come and take your stuff as well. And it's like, it's not comparable. You can't compare a quarter of an acre small garden or not having a garden to having 2,000 acres in an estate. And, land that was been paid for by the colonial project.
Tell us about the purchase of the Bright Head estate in Dorset.
The people that we think have bought it, is a man that owns lots of land in England. He owns so much that in an interview he said, I don't actually know how much land I own. And why would we support him over a woman who wanted to go grieve her animals, or people that got proposed and could never go back to the site they got proposed? I don't know what it is. It is a deep misanthropy against ourselves. There's like a self-hatred. It's like internalized hatred of people, and not valuing one member of the public that's been walking there for 40 years compared to a man who doesn't live anywhere near the area, who's just come in and bought it up and excluded people. I mean, let's look at that from a psychology point of view. What have we done to that person to make them believe that they don't have a right and their fellow person in their community doesn't have a right to exist on land and wouldn't want to fight for it? And I guess there's always people that just want to maintain the status quo. And there's a fear going on in there if they challenge the status quo. What does it mean for them? What does it mean for their beliefs and what they believe in?
How does this relate to the difference between permissions versus rights?
Yeah, the previous landowner gave permissive access. So I could give permissive access to my house if I wanted, I guess. Like you could just, anyone can fling open their garden, which is what they did, right? They gave permissive access to part of the state, and then there's no legal underpinning of that access. So Crow land and public rights of way, there is a legal underpinning that it's my right to be on these bits of land. There was none on that bit of the estate, and the owner did. So the new owners they've got a right to be able to exclude, because that's the system we have, which is why as a campaign we support rights-based access, so that the whim of one rich landowner can't take away my rights. Because at the moment our system is based on where there is permissive access, it's up to, more often than not, an older white man who gets to just take the rug from under us. This is what happened with Alexander Darwin on Dartmoor. He wanted to. These are the people in charge, right? Hundreds of years of people sleeping under the stars, the only place left in England to wild camp. And one man was like, no, I don't want. We're talking about tens of thousands of people who enjoyed this right, and he didn't want that anymore. That's who we're putting our access to land in the hands of, unless we have a rights-based system. We say the same about the NHS, right? If my access to healthcare was based on one person at each hospital who gets to decide who doesn't have healthcare, I wouldn't want that system. I would want it to be my right. When I turn up to the hospital, I get treated like every other single person, which is I have access to free healthcare. You wouldn't want it to be permission based, so someone kind of decides, yeah, for you, no for you. We wouldn't want that. So in terms of something else we need for our health, it needs to be rights-based.
Are there other countries that have successfully implemented a rights-based system like this?
Sweden and Norway are a really good example of countries close by that have a right to roam. And alongside that long-standing culture of being in the outdoors, there is a large understanding is just like it's for all people to look after and care about. So they do have like a culture of, despite being very cold countries, can be very cold, the general population is really outdoorsy. Like this, people spend time outdoors in a really healthy, accessible way. And infrastructure is put in place in order to help people to do that. More car parks. It's understood that it's something people are going to do. So the infrastructure is built around that. And where there is a right to roam, it is just success stories. Sure, it needs to be managed, but it's worthy of our, taxpayer money.
Why is it so important?
Well, it's going to be a healing period. Let's just accept that we've done damage and we need to heal. There's no point saying, oh, well, it's too hard. Let's just carry on doing what we were doing. You would say, no, actually, the best day to change is today. The best day to change is always today. If it can't be yesterday, it's today. And today's better than tomorrow. So let's start allowing our population to heal today. And that can't be done without access rights. You can't expect our nation, 60 million people, to learn about how to do a campfire, how to camp responsibly, not to litter, where to go. You can't teach people that without the rights alongside it. It's impossible. It's impossible to do without rights.
What has the movement achieved and what is still needed?
The main win of the campaign so far in terms of like what we can celebrate is the fact that access is being discussed. So changing access law and rights is being discussed within government. I think what's really important this year in particular, I guess we, on a really practical level, we want more MPs to be pushing for a right to roam. And when there is a review of what access law needs to be changed or amended or created for England, to have a huge, much broad base, bigger support for that.
Tell us about the Raven Network.
The Raven Network is a group. It's a network. It's a peer support network for people of colour who work in the nature conservation space. So environmental causes, nature and conservation is predominantly white, middle class spaces, and it's the second least diverse sector after farming, and it can be quite a difficult sector to work in. And so primarily that network is for people of colour to talk to other people of colour across the sector to be validated in their experiences of working in a sector, which can be quite harmful, but it doesn't really have accountability for its harm. And quite often people in the network are the only person of colour within the whole organisation. And so to talk about race, to talk about equality and change, and to be the only voice in the room representing people of colour is just hard work to do. And so the network provides a space to be validated and understand what's going on. An extension to that over the last year is really been to understand what does a decolonial approach to nature conservation, how does the sector need to change? So there's these two things which are mounting from the same ideologies and principles of working, but like how we want these sectors to look after their staff and be kind and safe places to work.
What is next for the network?
So our next step really is to, we're currently waiting on the results of a funding application bid so that we can hire a couple of members of staff and to allow the network to become its organisation in its own right and to become constituted. And it has very, very little resource. Even though the network is made up of people who are employed by their own organisations, but able to to hold it and take it forward. The next steps would be to get funding, and that's what we're looking to do.
Are there any other exciting projects on the horizon?
There's a film coming out, a film documentary. There's been a film crew that's been filming the Right to Roam campaign for 4 years. And finally, the film Our Land is going to premiere in June the 21st. And it's brilliant. And I would really, if people want to understand what the Right to Roam campaign is all about, I would encourage people to find where Our Land is showing. But it will be premiered on the Sheffield Film Festival on the 21st of June. But then I don't know. I guess that there's an Instagram page, Our Land Film.
What is your worry and your hope for the natural world?
My worry is that we can't repair our relationships soon enough. And my hope for the natural world is that we do repair our relationships soon enough.
What is your happy place in nature?
I think sunrise. I think probably wherever I am at sunrise, before everybody's woken up, and the dawn chorus. The beginning of the day is my just favourite part of the day. Anything's possible. It feels like a spell, and whenever I get up for sunrise, it's very, 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 very restorative to my being and sense of place.
Thanks for tuning in to Rewild Yourselves in Conversation series. To learn more about the inspiring Rewild Yourself champions and for more ways to find your wild, visit rewildyourself.com or join the conversation on Instagram at rewildyourself.